Hej, välkommen till dagens filmrum här på Filmhuset. Denna session kommer hållas på engelska. Okay. My name is Clara, and I'm one of the film commissioners here at the Film Institute. And I'm very excited to introduce the session today called Storytelling Beyond the Box. And it's not only because, in my opinion, that storytelling is the most important tradition we have, but it's also because of the diversity of how we tell and how we meet and how we craft stories. We talk a lot about whose narrative should be claiming history and how to reclaim and told narratives that have been, by tradition, told in very singular perspectives. So, for me, this is a very, very important subject, and I think for you too. But also, for me, storytelling is really about human connection and our way to document our time for future generations. And I think in some ways, maybe telling the world about what we didn't know. But today, we're going to engage in storytelling quite differently, crossing boundaries on formats, genres, and approach in order to communicate through different platforms and in meetings with their audiences. So I'm very honored to introduce Alison Norrington, based in the UK and founder of Story Central. Welcome. The next 90 minutes, and I think there will be a little time for Q&A at the end. And I also want to mention, after the session at 12:15, there will be room for 4 speed dates where you can ask for a consulting meeting with Allison for about 10 minutes. There will be 4 slots, and there's a first come, first served basis. I will be outside, and you can get a number. So, I hope that you will get inspired. So without further ado, thank you.
And it's not the first time I've done speed dating either, let me tell you. That's another story. We won't go into that one. Okay, so thank you for all coming. I think it's such a fun space to be in. So we're quite excited to be here. And thank you for giving up your Friday morning to be here too. It's always a big thing. As Clara said, I've come to this as a storyteller. And I started my company, Story Central, about 10 years ago. And when I was looking for a name, I was asking a lot of execs in the industry across publishing, film, TV, what they thought of the name of my company, proposed company. And they were all a little bit, oh yeah, I don't know, Story Central, like why? And I said, because story's at the heart of everything, in terms of at least what I do. I'm now glad I stuck with it and didn't listen to advice. But just to give a little context, there's quite a lot of people, I feel, that talk about this kind of thing, telling stories across different platforms, for different audiences, different experiences. But I come to this as a writer predominantly. So I started as a novelist, nothing highbrow, don't Google, kind of like Sex and the City kind of stories. And I started as a novelist, and I had a 3-book deal back in about 2001. I didn't really know what I was doing, had no real concept around structure of story, other than having read loads of books and watched loads of films and TV shows. So I kind of came in a little bit from the side. After 3 books, I realised that I had developed my craft to a point that I wanted to stretch what I was doing, but the publisher at the time didn't want me to do that. I mean, you know the kind of format and genre of those Sex and the City kind of stories. You don't really evolve the characters. You don't really go onto the dark side of anything. It's all very kind of on the surface level. So I moved away from that, and I did a master's degree in creative writing and new media in 2005 or 6. Didn't really know what the new media part was. Didn't really care about that bit. But that changed everything, actually. I'd already dabbled in plays, so I'd had a couple of plays put on. As a promotion for the books, I'd been forced into writing journalism, features and pieces, basically to promote themes in the book. So I'd looked at writing books, I'd done journalism, I'd written plays. New media, which is now old media, was quite a surprise to me. So to be doing a master's degree in 2006 with new media as an element was at the time when Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all of those platforms were coming up. So as part of the MA, we had to tell stories on those platforms. My strategy to try and keep things simple was to take my fourth book and to smash it like a piñata. So all the pieces would fall across these platforms, and I would cut and paste a chapter of my book every day and put it on a blog. Except, a chapter of a book is around 3,000 words. You try and read that on a screen, you just want to die. It was a wall of words looking at me. So within 2 days, my strategy was out the door, right? So I had to look at new ways to tell these stories. And I could see, of course, I know that I write differently if I'm writing like this or if I'm writing with a pen. I feel like this is more of a stream of consciousness as it just comes out. Sometimes it's a load of crap. But when I'm writing with a pen, it's slower and it's more considered. And I feel too that whether I'm reading a book or I'm reading on a screen, I'm also in a different mental mindset as to how I'm experiencing the story. So for me, the idea of storytelling beyond the box means that you don't actually hit the project with a piñata, very bad approach, zero strategy, and see where the pieces land, but you actually take on board 3 things that are very important to me. One is the narrative design of your story, which we kind of get that, right? But the 2 other elements are the experience design, which is how you guide people through your story, where they find these pieces and how they interact with them. And for me, the most important is the emotional design. So one thing I think I talk about quite a lot is, as storytellers, we are puppet masters for people's emotions. And also as storytellers, because sometimes we're so embedded in the story that we're telling, and we're looking at it, of course, from a commercial point of view, right? How do we monetize it? Where does it roll out? What's the distribution? Who's going to see it? Because we're focused on that, we don't always think of the emotional impact of our stories. But the fact is, if we walk out of a cinema, turn off the television, close a book, shut down the laptop, and we've finished experiencing a story, the chances are, if it's a good story, you walk away with a certain emotion. We're not always tuned in and mindful to that, because we've enjoyed what we've done and we go and talk about it or not. But the fact is, as storytellers, we have the capability of having an audience walk away feeling really empowered, uplifted, inspired, which is great. We also have the opportunity to puppet master that emotional journey that they might feel a little bit crappy about themselves, or they might not like the mirror you've held up to them. And sometimes that's okay too, right? But for me, the point is to be really mindful of the power we have as storytellers on leaving people with a certain feeling. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is that kind of circle of narrative design, experience design, and emotional design. That's not to say the commercial element isn't important, of course it is, but I feel we're all pretty much really tuned into that. So my first question always is the why question, and this comes from 2 angles really. So most of you probably have seen the Simon Sinek talk about Start With Why, and he basically, quite cleverly and much more eloquently than me, plays off Apple and Microsoft. So he would say, for example, when Microsoft bring out a new product, they start up right in that top corner with what it is. They'll tell you what it is they've got out. Now that's probably what most companies do who are selling a product. They tell us what it is. The problem with telling us what it is we're bored of that. Everyone's telling us what it is. I get projects pitched to me every week. I have emails, text messages on my phone, pop-ups, bus stop banner ads, everywhere. People are telling me what they've got, what they're selling. And that's the same for all of us. The fact is, that's quite hard for us to engage with because we're a little bit deaf and numb to the noise. Of course, Apple are far more smart, right? Apple stuck with why they've brought something new out. Apple will start with telling us a story, giving us a problem that they've identified that we probably don't know about. Apple will say something like, We have developed this new piece of software or this new app or this new device because, whatever it is, we've found you're not managing your money very well. We've found you're not managing your diet and your lifestyle very well. We have developed this thing because. Now that's news to us. We didn't know we wasn't managing our shit very well, right? But Apple know that we're not. So they tell us why they've done something. And then we go, okay, so what is it? We want to go straight to the what, because we haven't got time for all of that. And they go, no, we're not going to tell you what it is. We're going to tell you how it works. This is how it works. It takes your blood pressure every morning, it syncs with your bank account and whatever it might do. So they tell us why, and then they tell us how. So they basically give us a problem, and then they give us the solution. What they've really done is told us a story that we didn't know. And then you've got the context, why they've done it and how it works, great. You then say what it is, and it could be something quite boring, like a new app, or an iPhone 12, or whatever it might be, right? The fact is, if at the what moment, you don't rush and queue around the block to buy the new thing, it's not necessarily a problem. Because what it means is you guys then have the story to tell back. So you could be with friends or colleagues or families at work or in the pub or wherever you might be, and someone might say, oh, did you see the new iPhone 12 is coming out? You go, yeah, you know why they did that? You do Apple's marketing for them because you tell their story. So I think this is quite important too in terms of two elements. One is how we pitch our work. One is to not maybe start with the what. Oh, it's an 8x12 episode, series episode for kids aged 6 to 12, whatever. Everyone's doing that. How about if we pitch our projects more with why we've done it? Perhaps it could be something more like, I found amongst my kids' age group, they're all talking a lot about dum 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 dum. And I'd like to tell a story that kind of encourages and educates them on this topic that I feel they're quite confused about. They go, how will it work? Well, it'll come to their phone every day, or they can see it on their iPad, and then there'll be a community maybe that they share and talk about stuff. And they go, what is it? And they go, well, it's an extended 6x12 series for kids aged da-da-dum, right? But to start with the why and the how, sets your project aside from everyone else who's just telling whoever it is what they've got. So I think to start with why in terms of pitching is really important. But I also think to start with why is really important in terms of why we are telling the stories we tell. Like, what is it at the heart of what we're doing that's so important? Like, where is our passion? Where is our heartbeat? Why are we doing what we do? If you're working on something that's not lighting your fires and you're not passionate about, maybe you can't help that because it's a job-related thing, but how can you bring some passion and heart into it? Because if you know why you want to do what you're doing, and you know what you want to do, get into the heart of the why and the how. Kind of makes your idea and project more unique. So you could be in a situation where you're pitching the 3 Little Pigs to a commissioner, and you're relying on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, for example, to tell that story. And you're sitting outside the commissioner's office and your phone pings and it's your friend saying to you, oh my God, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube are gone. They're dead. They're all closed down. You walk in to pitch your 3 Little Pigs, you've got nothing underneath it. There's somebody beside you with a 3 Little Pigs story that's going in with a why they're doing it. They want to tell a story about how important it is for young people to learn to be independent and to move away from the home and to understand how to sustainably build their homes and their communities. So the why and the how actually still hold strong, even if the platforms you're relying on die and fall away. So to understand your why, I feel, is at the heart of everything we do. But there's another why that I talk about telling stories outside of the box. And it's this: the evolution of conversation between storyteller and audience. And where it says storyteller and audience, that could also be brands and consumers. So it wasn't that long ago that brands or storytellers were hidden away. There was no way that the annoyed public could get to them and complain, only through letters that went to some office somewhere. But when I wrote my books, I had no idea who my audience were. Me and my mum used to do stakeouts in the bookstore and hide and watch. And she's picking one up, oh, she'd put it down again. I didn't know who they were, these people. Those days are completely gone. The barriers of dialogue between us as storytellers and our audiences are open and they're busy. There's nowhere to hide, basically, which is kind of scary, but maybe also pretty good. So there was a study done for Intel not so long ago, a few years ago, in the US, about the levels of conversation between storytellers and audiences. And through the research, it was deemed there are 4 levels of conversation between storytellers and audiences. The first one is this. The first one is pretty much what they called the broadcast model. And the broadcast model's kind of statement is, here's a closed story world, I don't want or need to listen. It's locked down. That's what we've been used to probably for the majority of our time, being exposed to television and film. That's pretty dead, and I think at least the broadcasters that I've been speaking to sometimes recognise that's still where they are, but are also quite passionate about trying to move away from that a little bit. Because if we think the audiences are now the boss, which I believe they are, because they have so many options for where they consume their story, then we as the storytellers need to dial into our audiences. The days of there being just a television in the corner with a few channels on are gone. The days when we could just get our books from the library or the bookstore are gone. The minute the internet came to life, it opened up all of our opportunities to reach audiences. So they can go wherever they want. They download stuff for free, they pirate stuff, they photocopy things and upload it. There's nowhere to hide. So the broadcast model for me, dead and gone. The second level is my favourite level. The second level they called the listening model. And the statement of the listening model is, here's a story world I've created, come in and play, I'm listening to you, but I'm still making the decisions on my story. Now, this is a little bit of an illusion of interactivity. This is what John Chu, the director of the Legion of Extraordinary Dancers, and Justin Bieber's Believe adopted with Bieber's movie. So it's a little bit of a con, but I'll show you anyway. What he would do is post, he wouldn't of course, but would post images on Twitter of moments of the show with simple questions like, in the next scene, should he wear the black hat or the white hat? And understanding who the audience were, predominantly teenage girls, they knew how to talk to them with a dialogue that would engage them. The teenage girls felt very, very important and listened to by the fact they were being asked. And the simple response was #black, #white. It made no difference. Like, they weren't stopping the shoot to wait and see what Twitter would tell them to do, right? So in a way, it's an illusion of interactivity, it's an illusion of listening, but regardless, it made the fans feel they were heard and they were seen. So what that happened is when the movie came out, there'd be a cinema full of the fans, and there'd be certain moments when they go, he picked the black hat, that's what we wanted. Or, oh damn it, we didn't get the black hat, right? Didn't matter to anybody, but it meant that in the audience there were a few more kind of fans who were advocates because they had some skin in the game kind of thing. Now, of course, there were loads of other responses, #I don't care what hat he wears, whatever. The point was they weren't really listening back to that, but to get these scenes or these images from the shoot made the fans feel listened to. And I think there's ways that we can do the listening model, even when we're in the concepting phase of an idea, to how to know who our audiences are and how to listen back to them. The third level was called Welcome to My World. And this statement would say, here's a world I've created, the same as the listening model, come in and play, but this time I am listening to you, but you can also add to it and remix on it and build on it and collaborate. So with the TV show Heroes, the characters were introduced online before the TV show went out, and the fans were encouraged to get to know the characters. What actually happened with this show, within a couple of seasons, the fans had created like an audience kind of fan wiki, which was so well documented. The writers in the writer's room, discarded their Bible and used the fan wiki that had been collaborated on. Because the fans were so engaged, and because they'd given agency to kind of dig in and get involved, they were picking up things that even the writers perhaps hadn't picked up on. You know, the fact that one of the characters would always wear this colour shirt or a certain fashion brand, and the writers used the fan wiki as their reference tool. And that also went on to Heroes Reborn, being actually recommissioned due to fan advocacy and demand. The fourth level, don't go near this, is take it, it's yours. And take it, it's yours, basically is you saying, here's a story what I've created, run with it, do what you want with it. This to me is like horror movie gone wrong, right? But Eric Kripke, the writer of Supernatural, did this with, I think, season 8 of the show. He openly invited fans to create canon and add storylines to what he'd created, and many of them did. Now, to do that on season 8, the fans pretty much know the rules of the world anyway, but still it's a kind of a dodgy bet, really. But he did incorporate some of the fan canon into the season, and he got a lot of press for it, some bad, some good. Some loved it, that he was listening to his audience and opening it up for them to collaborate. Some hated it and said, you know what, man, you're the storyteller, what are you doing, like opening it up to people? He couldn't win, really, but it didn't matter, he got lots of press. Maybe that was the idea. So there are the 4 levels of conversation. The broadcast model, we're not listening. The listening model, which is my favourite, because I think even in development phases or concept phases, you can identify where your audiences are hanging out and listen back to them. So that's my big tick. Then Welcome to My World, where you invite fans to collaborate or remix stuff, and then Take It, It's Yours, which would not be my thing. I'd be those little red eyes in the corner on that one. I'm not feeling that one at all. Anyway, I'm now going to quote somebody that I don't like anymore, which is Kevin Spacey, but I'm still going to quote him. Not because I like him anymore, because I now think he's a jerk. However, he did say something clever one time. Only one time. And I've often thought about taking this out. However, if we could just cast aside for one split second the fact that he is now a jerk, he said this to the Edinburgh International Television Festival in the April of the year that House of Cards came out. And he basically gave this cautionary tale to the studio execs at the Edinburgh International Television Festival, saying you have an incredible confluence of a medium coming into its own just as the technology is drastically shifting. Studios and networks who ignore either shift, whether the increasing sophistication of storytelling or the constantly shifting sands of tech, will be left behind. Now for me, the key moment of that was this line actually, the increasing sophistication of storytelling. And we've all heard the news about the golden age of TV and all the rest of it. We've got like Breaking Bad that was basically 64 hours something of television. We are exposed to the most magnificent storytelling right now than we ever have had before. As a writer, that's both thrilling and completely terrifying because the bar is really high now, which is great. But it's also kind of scary because, again, there's nowhere to hide, right? So we have this moment of increasing sophistication of storytellers, which means our audiences are at the forefront of that. So as much as we are creating, we are also the audiences, and we know how we feel. We know how tuned in we are to the great idea of modern storytelling. And we probably, too, are active and vocal on social media. We are our audiences. We know how we would behave. There's nowhere to hide. So, as storytellers now, flipping us from an audience to a creator, we need to find genuine, relevant and credible processes to build great story worlds. We need to understand the fundamentals of themed storytelling and also understand levels of immersion. So how deep into our world can we bring our audiences and experience design? So it's quite a complex toolbox I feel that we need. But I also feel that there's many people that make this seem very difficult. And I'm hoping through this time, I'll break down some of that because I actually think it's quite easy. My 3 favourite words, genuine, relevant, credible. You need to be those 3 things in 3 different areas. You need to be genuine, relevant and credible to your audience. You need to be genuine, relevant and credible to your story, but also to the platforms and the timelines of which you release that story. So, for example, there was also studies done that played off more kind of old school European cinema against US cinema. And the story goes that American storytelling more traditionally, was you enter the scene late and you leave the scene early. So if there was a murder scene, for example, we'd enter the scene with the body on the floor and a black glove on the body, and the detectives there taking photos and trying to figure it out, and the scene ends. And the next scene, you see the character maybe in a taxi with a cab driver wearing just one black glove, right? It's a big gap. They actually don't tie together. The only thing that holds those scenes together is the black glove. So as an audience, we work really hard. We think we're chilling out watching a film, but we work really hard because we're filling the gaps in. We're telling as many stories in the gaps between the scenes as the storytellers are telling when they write the scenes. So although we're sitting back with a coffee or a beer, we're really figuring this stuff out. European cinema, more traditionally, because I don't think this is the case now, you would enter a scene early and leave the scene late. So you may have entered the scene and seen the murder happen. And you would stay in the room while the detectives arrive. And then you would hear the conversation between the detectives and what they were going to do next. So the scenes were far more padded out. There wasn't those gaps for the audience to try and figure out what the hell's going on. And when I talk about the increasing sophistication of storytelling, that's where we are now. Big gaps between the scenes. Where we're like, hang on a minute, that's the stuff that makes it exciting. That's the stuff that makes you go online and go, what the hell just happened? Or talk to whoever you're with and go, whoa, it went from that to that. So to be genuine, relevant and credible to your platforms and to your experience means you can turn all the knobs up of that kind of behaviour with your audience. How they try and figure it out and how they have those conversations. So kind of condensing it down, it has been called, in its more infancy forms I believe, transmedia storytelling. Henry Jenkins kind of defined the term quite famously around 2004 I think. And this was his quote: "A transmedia story unfolds across multiple media platforms, with each new element making a distinctive and valuable contribution to the whole." So the idea was, it was kind of like breadcrumbs. So you'd have a series of jigsaw pieces maybe of your story that was told in lots of different places. Each jigsaw part had to work on its own, but once you started plugging them in together, you had this bigger overview of what was going on. I think things have moved on since then, and at one time I would have called it transmedia storytelling, but now I don't. Now I like to look at it more as what I've said with the narrative design, the experience design and the emotional design. So I kind of look at it this way: organic, fluid storytelling that retains relevance and continuity across platforms, but is infused with the fun of gaming behaviours. So it doesn't mean it needs to be funny, it needs to be satisfying and fun for people to dive in and do more than simply watch. And that's the moments I'm talking about, the gaps between the scenes. How can you tell your story so you have the gaps in there that make people want to find out more? It doesn't work so well with comedy, doesn't work so well with romance. Those kinds of stories are very lean back and the audience want you to tell them the story. Like my master's degree dissertation was my fourth book, which I pinated. And it was a romantic kind of fun story. And after 69 days, I asked the audience to choose which one of 4 guys my character would date. Nobody gave a shit. 69 days in. That's like going to a movie or an event, and you're an hour in, and then they come out with the microphone, and they start asking you, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do it. That kind of stuff has to be brought in right near the front. So people know, oh my God, I'm in an environment where we're going to be doing this thing. They're going to be asking me stuff, I've got to join in. Like, I really failed with it because I waited 69 days before I turned the camera around on and they all just went, right? I didn't want to play. I actually set up a forum for them to have the conversation. And because nobody was in there, I kept going in like a schizophrenic under different names. That was a bad experience. I'd go in under different names, literally watching the clock, like 2 minutes have gone by. It's feasible now that somebody else would go in. Different character names I gave myself, writing in different styles. After 2 weeks of absolutely talking to myself and my various alter egos, nobody else played. It was just sad me. So I learned the hard way that if you want to encourage that interaction, you need to get it in there quite early. What I did find a couple of years later, when I was trying to write a study on my failure, I found that people had gone in there way after I'd gone, and they were talking about elements of the story. They weren't talking about what I wanted them to talk about, but they started off by talking about the story, comparing their dating experiences to the character, and they'd kind of become sort of friends, and they were chatting in there, right? So I wanted to go in and go, oh, hi, I'm the writer, thank you. But I realised they didn't want to know me. They weren't interested in me. I'd created a space for them. I was too bossy. I was like, yes, now you're all going to come over here and do what I want you to do. They were like, we ain't doing that. We're doing what we want when we're ready to do it. So my way of leading them in was absolutely flawed. So I tried to have this philosophy of the fun of gaming behaviours. But what's the fun if someone's making you do it? Completely defeats the object of fun, right? So a big lesson learned there for me is how to instigate that kind of behaviour in the first place. And I'll show you a little clip later of something else, but this idea of giving people the affordance and the allowance to step towards you and play is a whole new topic. So when I look at story in a very, very basic way, these are the things as well that I would consider. Always story at the centre. But then the things that spiral around that I like to consider when I'm creating or I'm working with other people who are storytellers is, of course, the experience you want to deliver. Now, I'm a big advocate for the theme or the message of your story to echo the experience. So I'm just going to park that for a second about the idea of theme and experience coming together. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Other things we look at, of course, business model. How many times can we skin this thing in different ways to make money out of it from different partners or sponsors or audience types? How much of a business model can we build around one story? That's the good part about transmedia storytelling, because you tell different parts of it across different platforms. So the business model, absolutely. How many times can we reframe that one thing? Who are the audience? Now that comes right at the beginning. And I feel traditionally, with old school TV, it didn't happen at all. There were certain channels that talked to certain audiences and we didn't need to think about that. But now if we're going to use the internet and we're going to look at ways of telling stories across different platforms, we need to know where our audiences are hanging out. We need to know what they're talking about. We need to know what they're into. You know, we could try to tell a story to some people thinking we know them. We don't know them at all. Friends of mine, 3 guys, wanted to write an iPad thriller, and it was a 5-day experience. And it was about £7 or £8, I think. And they created this brilliant iPad thriller. And they were looking to engage with 30 to 35-ish year old gamer guys. They were devastated when they found out that 50 plus women actually were really engaged with their story. Not impressed. And they found that this happened because the guy they'd written as the main character, for some reason, was super hot. And whatever way he was going through the story, these women were like, phew, getting all kind of hot and bothered about this character. They were literally so pissed off, right? And in our conversations to them, which I found quite funny, I would say, what are you going to do? Like, you've got a whole bevy of an audience you did not think you would get, but you've got them. So what are you going to do? Carry on telling stories for them? Or be like stubborn and go, no, we're telling it only for these people, which is what they decided to do. So the fact is, it's also a prototyping exercise to figure out who you're talking to. You know, we've all created things that we think this person is the main character, but you find everyone's really engaged with somebody that you perhaps wasn't thinking would be so attractive. So in order of like figuring your audience out, that comes quite early. And that could come from the listening model too, when you're even prototyping concepts or ideas. Execution is key. Execution is everything, because without that, all of this is a glorified hobby, right? If we can't execute on it in the right way, with the right timing, and the right pacing, and in the right places, it's a dead-in-the-water project. So execution is the key to all of it. But also platforms. And for me, in my consideration of how this all works, platforms are in the back of my mind at the beginning, but also they do tend to present themselves as I move through the project. The more I understand the experience I want to deliver based on the theme, the more I understand my audience and figure out my business model, the more I get to think, okay, I could tell parts of it there and parts of it there, and over here they're going to act in this way, over there they're not going to talk to me, but they're going to just consume it and take it away. So the platforms are really important, but to put them at the forefront, and I know sometimes with work, if we're working in specifically film or TV or gaming, platform has to be the primary concern, but any ancillary platforms I feel often present themselves as we move through. So to look at something traditional like the Mr. Men, they all live in a story world. We don't really know what that world is. And their stories never really cross over. So we've got a big story world that's been going for many years, but we don't really see the world. We don't really understand the rules of the world. And we don't really see how they live together. It's a series of stories that sit separately. If we look at something like Hedge Trauma, which some of you may know, premiered at Sundance by Lance Weiler quite a few years ago. And the way Hedge Trauma works in a very, very simple form is, for example, people were walking down the street on their way to the theatre, and there would be telephone boxes with the phones ringing, or brown envelopes on the side of the road with cheap cell phones that were ringing. I always think at this point, if that was now, there would be a bomb scare. And it just shows you how badly our worlds have evolved in just a few years, whereas something as innocent and fun as a phone ringing now would be seen as a potential bomb. However, moving on from that. So the phones would ring, and some people would stop and answer the phones. And when they answered the phone, there was a creepy guy's voice. I don't know what he said, but something weird. People then put the phones down, moved on, sit in the theatre, the movie starts, and there's the guy. So you've got a few people in the audience that are like, I just heard that guy on this phone. That is weird, right? So the movie rolls out. When the movie ends, as people were leaving, they're given like a really kind of hand-printed, drawn graphic novel that continues the story. As part of the graphic novel, you then have at the end a website where the players in the graphic novel are congregating and playing. So that if you go to the website, you also become involved in this hunt for who this guy is. As part of that, people would send their telephone numbers in, so they can get text message alerts on their phone for when the next bit happens. So a couple of days later, just when they think they've cracked it as a team, their phones would ring all at the same time, and it would be the creepy guy saying something to you like, you think you've got this sorted out, you are so way far from the end. This is just the beginning, right? So to look at it as like a series of like plot points, if you like, we have the telephone call, the movie, the graphic novel, the website, the telephone call. All of those pieces work alone, apart from maybe that first phone call. There may be people who answered their phone that never went to see the movie, and they're always telling a story about the day they walked down the street in Utah and a phone rang, and they spoke to this weird guy. But putting that to the side, you've got the movie worked alone. The graphic novel, some people would leave that in a pub or a bar or a train, and a stranger could pick up the graphic novel and enjoy that as a story on its own. People could join in with the website fun if it was recommended by a friend, without reading the novel or without watching the movie. So all of them worked separately, but when done together, it really amplified the experience. And in the most perfect world, that's the kind of path that we'd love to take people on. But you can understand from a design thinking point of view, there's quite a lot of strategy behind something like that. This is a very short clip from a web series called Ruby Sky PI. It was powered by a technology called Conductor, which I've worked with a few times actually, and they're brilliant. They actually work with automating responses through text, phone call, email, based on keywords that the audience interact with. And this was very much for teenage girls, and you can see, of course, the tone of it is that. I'll just show you a very short clip.
I've left you 11 puzzles.
If I were looking for the will, I'd probably try to think like the woman who dresses like a rabbit. Look at this. Clue number 1.
It's really important to change the way we create and design and write our content for this new medium, putting the audience right at the center of everything we do.
Need a clue, send me an email.
it is so creatively fulfilling and exciting, and that's because of the interactivity with the audience. I've been cut off from my audience for my entire career as a storyteller, and yet, as a storyteller, your first and most important natural partner is the person you're telling the story to.
What could this number mean? Could this be clue 2?
Well, I would always say, oh, well, I'll just, hop on the character's Twitter feed and answer their tweets, or I'll write all their blog posts and respond to all the comments, and everyone would say, well, that's great if you have 100 followers. What are you going to do when you have 1,000 or 10,000? How's it going to be scalable? And then along came Conductor. Not only would it allow me to interact with a very large audience, but also it allows you to incorporate interactive elements right into your storytelling without being a technician.
It's part of a larger puzzle. If you can't figure it out, consult Colin Singleton. It's an anagram. Help find the will. Solve Ava's puzzles at rubyscipi.com.
It's a dream come true for storytellers and for audiences, really.
So you can see there were some clear calls to action in there in terms of her saying to solve the problem, email me at. There were telephone numbers that were shown on the mugs and the camera would zoom into them. I've actually got to a point now, if I ever see a full telephone number on I'm going to go back to that. If I see a full telephone number on a screen, I am the egghead who rings or texts it. I would say 7 times out of 10 it leads nowhere. My friends think I'm completely idiotic. But the point is, I now believe, why would you show a full telephone number or a full email address if it's actually not a thing? There's no reason. If we're working with like live or filmed entertainment, why would you waste milliseconds of a shot to show a telephone number or an email address if they don't mean something? So my brain works that way. Now if I see something like that, I'll pick up the phone and they go, oh my God, there's nothing there. Sometimes there is though, and it shows them wrong. There's a horror film, a thriller a few years ago called A Time to Kill. And it's really messed up, you might remember the film, but there was this guy who was like killing people and he would live stream it through the website killwithme.com. And the police in the movie were really stressed because loads of people were logging in, but the more people that watched the live stream, the faster the person died, right? So one of the scenes, this guy's in this, tied to this chair in this big kind of tank of, I don't know what, let's say water, I don't know. And the more people that live streamed to watch, the quicker the acid was dropping into the water and all his skin was peeling off and everything. So at the end of the film, because they'd shown killwithme.com so many times, at the end of the film, I was like, let's have a look. And my friend was like, oh my God, like if you like go to killwithme.com, you might help to kill somebody more quicker. I'm like, oh, I don't care about that. So I went online and looked at killwithme.com and I was so pleased to find it was a proper website. It looked exactly like it looked in the film. And it was like waiting for my next victim or something like that. But I love the fact that because the website was such a key point in the story, they had just taken the time to make it and make it look like it was like legit and it was real. So I'm a bit of a geek with stuff like that, but that's only because I've so much now looking at phone numbers, websites, email addresses when they show up on the screen. This is my map of partly how I approach all of this. And I'm not going to go through all of this with you right now, but I'm happy to share it. To give a quick overview, I always, with story at the centre, start working in the green section first. The way to read the map is the big idea. That's the first thing I'll sit down with you and try and figure out. What's the big idea? What's the why? What's the theme or the message of your story? Then we'll look at the story world, and that could be as simple as in Mad Men, the offices of Sterling Cooper, Draper Price and each of their homes, or in terms of Avatar, or even Star Wars, the entire universe and galaxies of all of the planets and places. The location in the real world or in a fictional world. The genre of your story is the rhythm and the beat and the kind of percussion of your story in terms of experience. So we look at genre and the rhythm of that. Characters and archetypes. That's the first part I work on. Secondly, I move to the yellow part, which now puts the lens on the audience. And I like to look at the audience too as archetypes. I think this batching audiences by age is kind of weird. I understand, at least when I work with brands and in marketing, that's how they profile their target groups. But I also think that it's weird that we educate our kids batched by age as well, right? So I've got friends who are 42 who are as if they're 75. And I've equally got friends who are in the early 60s that might as well be 21. So to batch people by age, I think does a massive disservice to everybody in the room and beyond. Because at least I don't feel defined by my age and I'm only 21. Anyway, so look at our audience as archetypes. The hero, the villain, the temptress, the joker. How would they behave and interact with stories based on their inherent behaviour type rather than the fact they're 29? Anyway, it's a whole new lecture I would give on that. Genres and behaviours. So I've said like horror and thriller, there's big gaps. There's opportunities to dive in. Comedy and romance, there's less gaps. People more want the story to be told to them in a passive way. Levels of immersion, how far down a rabbit hole can we take them? Again, with thriller, horror, those kinds of detective type stories, there's a lot to figure out. So how far down would they like to be immersed? To really behave as if they are in the world rather than a passive voyeur outside of the world. Barriers to entry. An example for this is Twilight. In Twilight, the vampires do not die in the sunshine. In every other vampire story that I've ever known, they do. When they're exposed to sunlight, they wither and die. In Twilight, they don't. So in terms of a barrier to entry, the fans of Twilight learn that really quickly. It's a very low barrier to entry. But once you know these little things, you feel like you're in. You understand the world. Sometimes with stories like Lord of the Rings, even those stories when you open a book and there's a whole list of characters and a whole map and a whole preamble of backstory of the wars between all of these locations, it's quite a high barrier to entry to learn all of that before you step in. So even with like Game of Thrones, we've got the 7 kingdoms, but we learn very quickly what the dynamics are between those kingdoms. But even then you have like the Dothraki language and stuff like that, that's another barrier to entry. Some people learn that stuff. Even the language of the Na'vi in Avatar. If you look online, there's a whole dictionary of how you can learn to speak whatever that language is. Anyway, the orange section then looks at experience and experience design, interaction and participation. Do you want it? Do you need it? If you're inviting your audience to interact and join in, there has to be something that you pay back to them. Don't ever let it be just to serve your story, because they will hate you and they will tell everybody that they hate you. So you need to almost like under-promise and over-deliver on all of the payoffs that you give them if you're asking them to join in. The pink section is platforms, formats, gets a little bit more kind of technical then, but these 3 bits at the top for me are the key elements of development that I like to work in. And then the blue part, model, rollout, business, franchise, timelines, runways. But without that first section of the green, the yellow and the orange, this other part has no context or meaning. But I'm happy to share that, but there's loads I can say. I've got a whole 4-day masterclass on that map alone, so I can't spend too long on that. So 13 Reasons Why. Is there anybody that hasn't seen 13 Reasons Why? Okay, a few. Not many though. Okay. I'd like to just show a little case study on this actually, because the way it told stories across a series of platforms, I feel was really intelligent. And I also feel that they knew exactly how they wanted their audiences to feel, being mindful of the fact they had different audiences. So this was a show that would attract teenage children, but also their parents. And it was based on a 2007 novel written for young adults. And for those who don't know, it's a story of a young high school student who becomes more and more depressed as she's being bullied at school, and she ends up committing suicide. And it's quite hard to watch, and there was lots of press around this. There was lots of adults and parents that felt that this series glorified suicide. But on the plus side of that, it did open up many discussions between parents and their teenagers about what's going on in their lives. So there was some horror initially, but I felt the whole way they done it actually was really, really well done. Just 13 episodes, rolled out on Netflix. Before the suicide of the character, Hannah made 13 cassette recordings to recount the agonies of her life and what was going on. And she leaves the 13 cassette tapes behind, cataloguing all the things that had happened to her by different people. And these are the people that she feels are guilty of ruining her life. So each cassette begins, "Welcome to your tape," and she talks over what's gone on. Sorry. The "Welcome to your tape" thing became quite an online catchphrase. So Selena Gomez and her mum were the exec producers of the show, and it falls into a genre of entertainment aimed at young people. There's lots of partying and cliques and sex, but there's also sexual violence and self-harm. So they were very on the nose with being very realistic about what life is like. In a way, I feel that Scam was too. And I think any time that you're creating something like this for that age group, there's an opportunity to be very real and maybe terrify the older people and the parents, but to be authentic and genuine, relevant and credible to the audience, you have to show it like it is. So there were 12 parts to the plan. You have to find these on the map. The first part was the novel, number 1. Now that was written in 2007, so it took 10 years for this actually to come to life from book to screen. The second part was a YouTube channel, which strangely worked only with audio, at least at the beginning. The third part was the TV series, which is what came out last year. The fourth part is a soundtrack, which I thought was very smart. They put out on Spotify. The fifth part was a special show, which was almost like a behind-the-scenes show, which talked more on a serious note about suicide. There were psychologists and doctors and parents and even teenagers who had self-harmed. So it was a 30-minute doc, like behind the scenes. There was the website, number 6. 7, 8, 9, 10 is Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and Tumblr. 11 is user-generated content, of which there was a lot. And 12 was a kind of weird bot that for some reason only was put out in Spanish, but I don't quite understand why that happened. Anyway, number 1, the novel. So 2007, published in the US, quite a tough story. And at the heart of it, or in terms of theme at the time, Jay Asher, who wrote the book, said it was a tough story about the need of a sincere friendship. But it ended up much more than that. This is one of the YouTube videos that was out way back when the book first came out. I mean, we're looking at a video of a cassette tape being played. Like, there's nothing to look at.
Hello, boys and girls. Hannah Baker here, live and in stereo. No return engagements, no encore, and this time, absolutely no requests. I hope you're ready because I'm about to tell you the story of my life. More specific.
I'm not going to run it through, there's not a lot to look at. But the point was, that was put on YouTube in 2008 by a subscriber called Hannah's Friend 13. So even back then when the book came out, it looked like they were trying to find ways to bring it to life visually. There were 38,000 subscribers to that, which is just a series of listening to audio and watching it being played. The TV series, of course, was the main focus of this, and there's a short clip, but I'm not going to show you the clip because I don't think that's actually necessary. The Spotify playlist was the soundtrack. Notice like Selena Gomez features right there at the top, but there you go. And audio is very key in storytelling because we're listening to these cassette tapes and music plays a very big role as well. So the fact that this was put into an official soundtrack on Spotify, I thought was super smart. Music has a great power as well to take us somewhere or to pull up memories maybe from many years ago. So even listening to the Spotify playlist, having watched the series, it kind of took you back to key scenes that were quite important. So I thought it was a really clever way to use that. This was a special show which was called Beyond the Reasons. 30-minute documentary. Topics covered in here, much more on the nose than through the series. Suicide and depression, bullying and cyberbullying, women as objects, rape and sexual violence, and youth and education. Tiny clip, I don't want to show it all to you, but just to give you a sense of tone.
A rumor based on a kiss ruined a memory that I hoped would be special. In fact, it ruined just about everything.
13 Reasons Why was a really special story to me, especially when I read it for the first time when I was 14, because people were just really mean in middle school, and it really did change my perspective on how to treat people, because you really don't know what other people are going through.
As a society, we tend to shy away from these hard topics, and sometimes in cinema we do that too, and I think this is great because it says, no, this is a problem and it needs to be addressed.
Okay, you get the idea. This was the 6th part, which was a website. Now, I always look at this kind of thing as in-world and out-of-world, right? So there's part of these extensions that make you feel like you're a character in the world. I feel the Spotify playlist did that, because you watch it in the story and you feel it's part of being in the world. This was very much out-of-world. There was no punches pulled with the website. It's absolutely crisis information. If you put in 13 Reasons Why info, you're right here. They're not trying to sell the show to you. They're right straight on the nose with the topic of suicide. And they've got crisis lines and websites and everything on there completely up front. You don't need to search and find it anywhere. It's right there in front of you. In terms of Instagram, the purple or blue, whatever colour, nail varnish that Hannah used to write the numbers on the cassettes became a really big thing. And there were lots of posts kind of showing kind of solidarity, I suppose, around the colour of the nail varnish. And even if you read this, you know, I'm wearing blue nail polish for Hannah Baker, but not just for the fictional Hannah Baker, for all of the Hannah Bakers out there. This show has gotten people talking. I keep going on about this show, but it's because I relate to this character. I've been in her position. So a lot of people were kind of showing allegiance of solidarity about raising the issue of bullying and depression and suicide through the use of the colour of the nail varnish. Now, this is one thing I thought was brilliant. I think when I talk about experience design, this is a 2-minute clip that was put out on social media that I feel, probably more so for adults than teenagers, you see how quickly this kind of thing turns into despair. I've shown that to some people who, probably a lot older, who aren't familiar with how quickly that happens. I mean, not to that scale, but you know, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we get a message come in, and you know you've got to reply to it really quickly. And before you can get it done, another one comes in, and you like start going back to take off what you said, and then you start again, and you're like, oh my God, it's all happening too fast, right? So we're kind of used to that. But imagine being a teenager and being at the heart of that kind of behaviour. She couldn't quickly enough deal with this situation that was spiralling very fast. Now, one of the smart things I thought was when she goes to look on some of her friends' Instagram, it would say this user has blocked you. So they very cleverly created Instagram accounts for some of the characters, but after even just a few weeks, they closed them down. So they didn't have to keep putting content on all of the social media accounts because it made you feel like Hannah, that you couldn't kind of get in with the right people and figure out what was going on. You felt excluded and isolated and locked out. So the fact they created profiles but then pretty much closed them down really added to the experience, I feel, of knowing what it feels like to be at the heart of that. So this is the Tumblr, and there was a lot here that the fans created and put in. And some of the user-generated content actually became, in a way, bigger than the show. These were some examples of what was going on YouTube. I mean, the Netflix one is the third one down, but the others are not. And you can see like 75,000 views and 700,000 views. There was a lot of things that went out on YouTube. Deviantart, a lot of adults were afraid of Deviantart because of the word deviant in there. But it's actually a site for people to share their artwork. I mean, there are some weird things on there too, perhaps, but a lot of the fans felt they wanted to communicate how they felt about what had happened. They were putting lots of things up, poems and pictures and artwork of Hannah. And it became very clear that that age group want to express themselves. And they wanted somewhere to show their expression too. So a lot of the user-generated content was huge. This was the bot that somehow went out in Spanish, which I don't really understand a lot about this. It kind of simulates a conversation to try and introduce you to the narrative context of the series and warn you about bullying, but I didn't kind of get it, I've got to admit. So the fact was, a lot of the content was relatable and spreadable. The thematic premise or the message was strong and universal, and the messages are very clear and resounding. So there was just so many ways that this was told across so many platforms. I mean, again here, this was much more recent. 116,000 views, 44,000 views, 101,000 views. Fans were creating poetry and music, and they were remixing scenes from the show and putting it into their own little video clips. People wanted to express themselves around this story. And even in some of the research, it shows that it made teenagers more aware of how they were behaving with each other and the impact of that. It made parents more aware about what might be going on in their lives. It broke down barriers and opened up conversations. So when I said about the emotional design, they know exactly what and how they wanted people to feel. And I feel that their plan to tell it beyond just a screen-based series on Netflix was actually quite genius. So that's I'm a fan of that. So when I look at it from this way, I'm not saying that traditional storytelling is dead. I'm saying there's fundamentals in there that we need to retain and grow from. But you think maybe a book you could read in a couple of days, a movie you'd watch in a couple of hours, a concert, a live event, whether it's a theatre or a gig or whatever, you could get 4 hours out of that. But where the time is being spent is